For those of you that I have not yet met, my name is Amy Berger. I am the Assistant Director at the Dallas Regional Office. As I just mentioned, my colleague and supervisor Joel is passing the figurative mic over to me for this morning, so honored to be here. First, just a hearty welcome. Thank you for being here at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. This program that you're here for is convened by AJC's Community of Conscience Coalition. The Community of Conscience Coalition was launched in 2019 to advance our shared values of pluralism, civil discourse, and mutual respect. Among its members are top faith, ethnic, civic, and elected leaders from around our community. We unite across diverse backgrounds and perspectives to honor the American ideal, as together we strive to form a more perfect union. We now find ourselves in a watershed moment in the nation's history. The recent tragic murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and unfortunately, too many other Black lives to mention. There is a renewed conversation on pervasive racism. In June, under the leadership of COC members Catherine McGill, Pastor and State Representative Carl Sherman, Imam Khalid, Shaheed, both of which will be joining us today in conversation, as well as Dr. Lindsay Wilson, Interim Equity Officer for the City of Dallas. Planning began on this series of listening and learning opportunities. The idea behind this series is to take a deep dive into issues of pervasive racism and white supremacy that will inform future advocacy efforts. Today's program is the second iteration of our listening tour, A View from the Pulpit. As a supplement to this 5-part series, we have a resource guide with additional suggested readings, bios on our panelists and moderators, and relevant statistics. Please be on the lookout for that document. It is forthcoming and we will be sharing soon. In AJC's 113-year history, the organization has consistently worked to advance equity, advocate for civil and human rights, and celebrate diversity. We recognize that the fight against bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hate in all its forms are a responsibility for all of us, and are proud to convene these sessions as an important step forward in the process. Please note, AJC is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. And before handing it over to our moderator, just a few quick housekeeping notes. We are asking that everyone to please stay muted except for our speakers. We will be having a Q&A at the end, a questions and answer session. Please email any questions to dallas@ajc.org, and I will be sure to receive those. And in an effort to create a sense of community, this session, as you can see, is in a meeting format so that we can see each other. I do recommend toggling between the full group view as well as the speaker view. And now I would like to introduce today's moderator and our esteemed speakers. This session will be moderated by my AJC colleague, Rabbi David Levy, who is coming to us from New Jersey. He is the director of the New Jersey Regional Office. Prior to joining AJC, he served as a rabbi at congregations in New Jersey, Connecticut, and St. Louis. David will be wearing 2 hats as the moderator, providing the AJC and rabbinic perspective on A View from the Pulpit. Thank you so much for being with us. David will be in conversation with our three esteemed panelists. We have a really powerful faith group in the house today. Imam Khalid Shaheed, who is the Imam Emeritus at Masjid al-Islam. The Imam plays a very important role as a key member of our AJC Muslim Jewish Advisory Council that works to build positive relationships between the 2 local faith communities. He is also a member of the AJC Community of Conscience and played a key role as one of the conveners in today's programs. Pastor Carl Sherman is the senior pastor at the Church of Christ of Hutchins and serves as the Texas State Representative for District 109. The Honorable Pastor Sherman has served the community in a number of ways, many of which as a trailblazing first African-American to hold the position, such as when he became the first African-American to serve as mayor in DeSoto, Texas. The Honorable Pastor Sherman is a co-chair of AJC's Community of Conscience and also played an instrumental role in organizing these listening sessions. Reverend Dr. Michael Waters is the founding pastor of Abundant Life AME Church. Pastor Waters is a professor, award-winning author with titles that include Freestyle, Reflections on Faith, Family, Justice, and Pop Culture, as well as Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America, and a forthcoming book entitled The Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. He is an activist and a social commentator who has appeared on several media outlets, more than I could list at this moment. He has been recognized as a community leader of the year through several different distinctions, as well as a 40 under 40 leader of note by the Dallas Morning News. Just by those very brief version of the bios of all of our speakers, you can see we have a very powerful group, and really truly honored to have you all here with us today. Thank you so much for your time and participation. Again, as a reminder, if you have questions for our panelists, please send them via email to dallas@ajc.org. I now turn the floor over to you, David, with gratitude, and look forward to a hearty conversation.
Thank you, Amy. And I want to thank Joel and Amy for the opportunity to be with all of you this morning. It's really an honor to join these three distinguished panelists. We've had a little time to talk, the three of us, and get to know each other. So I'll say beforehand, if you all don't mind, we'll be on a first name basis for this discussion and just keep it close and friendly. And thank you for welcoming me even virtually into the Dallas community. It's wonderful to be with you virtually. I wish I were with you actually, and then I'd make Joel take me for brisket. But we can't do that, so a joy to join this way. We do, as Amy said, we stand at a profound moment in our country's long struggle with racial inequality. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others have brought us to a tipping point in this struggle against pervasive racism. And our Jewish values of justice and human dignity compel us to join in this call for substantial change. Leviticus teaches us that we cannot stand idly by when the blood of our neighbors is being spilled. Our Jewish obligation to engage in pikuach nefesh, in saving lives, compels us to work together to ensure the safety, justice, and dignity of our fellow men and women. And perhaps the core lesson of Torah, that every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, obligates us to build a society that treats everyone as a vessel of the divine. And so if we are to honor and practice these Jewish values, if we are to see Black Lives Matter as a Jewish value, then we must actively engage in addressing our country's long history of racism and inequality. We must be ready to engage in challenging conversations that can inspire us to join in actions that will lead to real and lasting change. And I hope this conversation is just that. So we'll begin with, we have a number of questions that the group agreed to. And we'll begin with our first one. And I'll preface this by saying we all agreed to do about 5 minutes answer to each question, which as a rabbi, I hate telling fellow clergy 5 minutes only. That's just not real, but we'll do our best. The first question is, how does your congregation engage in conversation or action to combat pervasive racism? And Khalid, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, the loving, the kind, the creator, I'm very honored and grateful to be with you this morning to address these critical issues in this critical juncture we have, not just in our society, but in the world today. I say in the world because white supremacy has struck a sensational chord worldwide. And when I say white supremacy, let me frame that. White supremacy is a racial hierarchy that is the result of a relentless campaign, a massive campaign that's going on for the last 400 years. It's been a campaign of drownings. No one knows how many souls were lost in the transatlantic journey coming to America. Campaign of murder, hanging, lynching, bombings, miseducation, lies, sometimes raw, sometimes subliminal, sublime. So all this still exists today. So I think it's a very good question in terms of how do we, our congregation, engage in conversations and action that pertains to systemic racism. I just want to frame white supremacy first. I believe that in our faith, God animates us to have concern for wrong that's done in our society and try to address those issues. In our holy book, the Quran, God tells us, he gives us a verse called the verse of righteousness. The first thing this verse does, it takes rituals off the table. It says the rituals alone, in and of themselves, by themselves, does not denote righteousness alone. It says that righteousness is having a beneficial belief system, believing God, believing the last day, the day of judgment, and all the prophets that have come. What's unique and interesting about this verse is that it goes on and gives a social component to righteousness. It says righteousness is not just being good, having a good belief system is being good. It's doing good as well. It says that righteousness is with the resources God has favored you with, bless you with. To use the resources, whether it's your time, whether it's your education, whether it's your energy, whatever God has blessed you with. To use those resources to address inequalities, the exploitation, the oppression, those who have no support in society. So that's a verse from the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said this. He said, if you see a wrong, you're to change it with your hands. If you cannot change it with your hands, you're to speak out against it. If you cannot do that, you are to condemn it in your heart. I think John Lewis said something similar. He said that we should speak out and speak up and get in the way. So it's basically the same thing. So in terms of what we've done here locally in the Muslim community, I'll just give you a brief history. Going back to the 70s, between 1977 and 82, our mosque, which is the oldest mosque, first mosque in the Dallas area, we visited over 400 churches, some black, some white, in the Dallas area to establish relationships. In the 90s, we worked with neighborhoods in South Dallas, the real neighborhoods of the drug problem, the crack houses. The PBS program Frontline did a documentary on this, and they called it you can Google this, it's called Dallas Drug Wars in 1988. It talks about how the crack epidemic in Dallas affected City Hall, the police department, and neighborhoods. Well, we went into those neighborhoods addressing those issues. We believe that drugs and the crack that appeared and loomed over black neighborhoods across America was a result of the complicities of white supremacy. So we went into the neighborhood working with neighbors, and we closed down 25 crack houses in Dallas and worked with neighbors to secure the neighborhoods for their children, for their families. That was in the 90s. So like I said, you can Google Dallas drug wars. You can see the tension that was brought to Dallas in the city halls, the city council, and with the police department. In around the year 2006, we started what we call Islamic Charity Day. This is something we started at our mosque, Dallas National Salon. And then a couple years later, we partnered with some national organizations like Islamic Lead and a lot of local co-sponsors, Muslim and non-Muslim, Christian groups here in town. Dispel ignorance. You can lower the barriers when you work together. It's a good way of dispelling ignorance. And a lot of times racism is a result of ignorance. So we established this Islamic Charity Day to address some of the social ills and inequalities that have been produced historically by white supremacy. This day is, the intent of this day is to address the literacy problems we have as a result of white supremacy, educational problems, family issues that we have, political issues, voter registration, and the substance abuse problem that exists as a result of the complicities of white supremacy. So these are some of the things we've done locally. And this overall is our understanding of why as Muslims or people of faith, the Abrahamic faith, why we should involve ourselves in these critical issues that exist in our society and around the world.
Thank you. Thank you. That's it's an amazing range of things that the Masjid's already been involved in. Let's move to Carl. Same question. How do you engage your congregation in conversation and action to combat pervasive racism?
I think that the Christian church has been complicit in systemic racism, and one of the things that we've done as a local church, we have merged. I was actually pastoring 2 churches for 6 years, 5 sermons on each Sunday and 2 on Wednesdays. One church was all white. I was the only African American in the church. The other church was predominantly African American. And we decided we would sell the property of the white church, and everyone would merge with the predominantly African American church. Well, that certainly was the vision, but most of those white congregants never set foot in the merged church. And this has a lot to do with the church and its involvement in what Brother Shaheed was talking about, systemic racism, and supporting it. In fact, historically, if you look at even the term race, it was a term that was established some 500 years ago to establish essentially a class system that would be predicated on different ethnicities. So if you're African descent, then you're in last place, because race, connotation with race is there is a competition. And America has been especially cruel in its system of supporting systemic racism throughout the fabric of our culture. And as a church, from a myopic perspective, what we have realized is that there is a miseducation of the general population. So we have to do our utmost to inform people. Now, as Paul said in Galatians 4:16, do I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? The reality is yes. Many folks can't handle the truth. And so they would rather run away and be a part of a white evangelical group that they are the majority culture in their congregation, so that they can continue to believe those truths that they continue to preach. So it's very important that as a church, and I've had to change since all are together. We are a small group, less than 200, more than 150. But I have to make sure that, during this time, George Floyd and others, that I remind our parishioners that this is not new. This was just captured on video. And this happens all the time. I've done some extensive study on this subject matter, and there's a reason that, I feel it's important that the church understands the truth, because in America, we have a problem with truth. We want reconciliation without truth, and we want these kumbaya moments, but it's usually getting the minority group to capitulate to the narrative that they want to perpetrate, which is essentially a narrative that they find palatable, because if they were to speak the truth, then it would be an indictment on the church, which supported racism. I mean, 1845, and this is going to be my close, when the Georgia Baptist Convention came together, that was the split. And where we got the Southern Baptists was because they believed in slavery and they wanted to continue to own their slaves. Imagine this, they brought their slaves to church. Our first churches in America, our preachers, all of them were white. They were our slave owners, and they continued to preach. So it's no way to correct this without facing the fact that what we've been told is an alternative fact. We have to confront it with truth, and that means we need to come together and speak in each other's pulpits and understand that there is a truth, and the truth will set us free.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are powerful words. Michael, I know you planted your church with a specific orientation to facing the divisions that are in the Dallas community. So how does your congregation engage in that conversation, engage in action, combating pervasive racism?
Well, thank you so much, David, and I'm honored to be on panel with these esteemed colleagues, and grace and peace to all of you. I'm a fifth generation minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. African Methodist Episcopal Church established in 1787 in Philadelphia, which was really the first nonviolent direct action movement to take place in America. The AME Church is the oldest historically Black church in the Western Hemisphere. And within our very DNA is opposition to systems of white supremacy. From that Genesis point, it's a part of our epistemology to our present day. And as you look over the trajectory of history, every time you see dramatic advancement for the progress of Black people and of all people in America, you see the AME Church. From the establishment of the first historically Black college in America, Wilberforce College is one of our churches, one of our church's schools. Paul Quinn College, of which my great-great-great-grandfather, Reverend William Leake, was one of 4 founders. The oldest historically Black college west of the Mississippi is connected to the AME Church, all the way up until the Civil Rights Movement. And through the Civil Rights Movement, just about every movement that took place, including the Selma to Montgomery March, took place from Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama. Rosa Parks was one of the deaconess within our church. I can go on. And so it's a part of our DNA to be a part of a liberatory theology that seeks to liberate all who are oppressed. And so first through the church I planted, Joy Tabernacle AME Church, and now in this new iteration, Abundant Life AME Church, having recently adopted and brought in one of our older congregations, we have sought to be consistent in opposing the forces of white supremacy locally and globally. And we are an intentional plant in South Dallas. Imam is our neighbor, and we're so grateful for his legacy and for his work. And I think that's important because there are a number of churches across South Dallas that have been there for a number of years, but they have been there as the neighborhood and community has changed over time. There are very few that have come in recent years intentionally to be a part of the necessary work of rebuilding and expanding and bringing about growth for the people of South Dallas. We've been involved in a number of aspects of movement. I'll name just a few, particularly around this prevailing issue of police brutality and racial violence. When young Jordan Edwards was killed in Balch Springs only a few years ago in 2017, shot by Officer Roy Oliver in the head while sitting in the vehicle along with his brother and cousins. We helped to mobilize the efforts to bring about justice in that case. Our congregation, in the tradition of so many congregations over the years, hosted the initial mass meeting, bringing in national leaders from the NAACP to Dallas, bringing in faith leaders from all across the Metroplex to organize ourselves to fight for justice on behalf of this young man. As a Poor People's Campaign, this iteration of the Poor People's Campaign was begun by Bishop William Barber. We were honored to be the first congregation in America to host the launch of the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's March for a clergy training and preparation at our congregation. When most recently we had the issue of the death of both and John at the hands of Amber Geiger, we were very active as a part of that work, and in fact received the John family at our congregation for their final press conference here in the city after we received justice. When a young lady was brutally attacked in Deep Ellum this past year, we had the press conference and organization for that work again within our congregation. And so we've been very active in providing space and giving voice to these issues and many others, joining the fight to bring about earned paid sick leave in the city of Dallas for over 330,000 residents in the city who were without earned paid sick leave, which is particularly important in our area because Dallas County has the most uninsured workforce in America. For our work to bring down Confederate monuments, those icons of white supremacy, that tremendous fight, which thankfully in this summer, the oldest monument that was in downtown right across from City Hall on city property at the convention center was brought down, working to overhaul the oversight of the Police Review Board. And so we've been active again in providing space and attempting to provide voice to really oppose the forces of white supremacy that are still very active within our nation and really active, truthfully, in the city of Dallas.
So, Michael, you bring us really well into our next question, which is to examine the role of politics and religion and how they've converged, and what the impact then of the faith community is in this quest for racial reconciliation. So maybe we'll go to Carl first, since this is the convergence of politics and religion, and that's kind of a defining part of your bio. So how has the faith community been able to impact that nexus?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that there are two ways to obtain power, and they are the organization of money or the organization of people. And the church is the central point for the Black community especially, but for the community of America, since we are based on a Judeo-Christian society, and this is where we get our power from, is a gathering of people, the codifying of people to change things legislatively. I think it is important that the convergence of this happens, because politics, absent of faith, is a cocktail for inhumanity. And what we have is a responsibility as church leaders, as faith leaders, members of the clergy, that we must be the conscience of America. And for too long, I think that we have not been at the seat or at the table to construct what our laws will be. You know, in the city of DeSoto, as you mentioned earlier, I was the first African-American mayor elected. Well, it's not by accident that DeSoto became the first city with body cams for all of our police officers in 2011, 2012. And the reason for that was because we were having, or I was receiving calls from African-American mothers and grandmothers informing me about the injustices that their children were subjected to, in particular young men who were arrested for minor traffic violations, such as not turning on your signal light within 100 feet. And, you know, you would think that that doesn't happen. Well, that's Sandra Bland. And we have to establish policy that changes things so that the outcomes change. And it is the responsibility of the church to get involved and provoke, I think, the leadership, whether it's at the Capitol or on the Hill, to make changes. I mean, you know, we haven't ended slavery. We've just called it by a different name. The 13th Amendment is another item that we must change because of mass incarceration of individuals, primarily people of color, that are incarcerated. And I tour our prisons in the state of Texas. We've got 104 prisons, and 75 of those don't even have AC in the housing units. We treat our animals better than we treat people. Yeah, and as I just close on this, I was speaking to the SPCA last year, and they awarded me with something. And I you know, as a pastor, as Brother Waters was saying, you know, we have a responsibility, and they've been doing it a long time. And you know, we can quote scripture, and we can go to Proverbs and talk about, you know, how a righteous man will treat his animals well. Proverbs 10:12, I believe, or it may be 12:10. I'm not sure, but it's one of those. But the fact of the matter is, we don't apply the scripture when it comes to how we treat one another, and it may be because we don't see people of color as fully human. And so I said to the SPCA, if I took my son's dog and I placed him in a cage in the summer, and I placed that cage in a garage, I didn't even have to finish before there were some people who were emotionally moved by that. And I said, we're doing that in the state of Texas, and in fact across this nation, from Mississippi, many of the prisons. There's a reason that the southern states incarcerate more people than the northern states. It has everything to do with our history and slavery, and those individuals are in slavery at this time. And the church, I believe, is going to be held responsible when God comes back. So the church and politics should be one. At one point, it was one, and that's how we got in this predicament in the first place, is that the church, through the Catholic Church, you know, commissioned for slaves to come here in 1619. But I may be going too far, so I'm going to stop there.
No, well, thank you. I do have to say your words resonated with me as a former federal prison chaplain. I think I was telling Michael about this. Working as a prison chaplain drove me into criminal justice reform. How we're treating those who we're incarcerating is beyond incredible, and on every level, and a reason where we bring our faith to the table in areas like this. Michael, how would you like to comment on this nexus between politics and religion, and how it relates to our quest for racial reconciliation?
Well, interestingly enough, it's impossible, particularly for the Black church, to be engaged in faith without politics because our very bodies have been politicized. Our bodies have been used as tools for the advancement of profits and pleasure, as well as oppression. I mean, when we talk about chattel slavery, I've got a few artifacts here. I teach courses in race in America. When you see a document such as this to be sold and let by public auction, and you have chattel slavery that sells slaves alongside rice and other items, you have a politicized body that is used for profits. When you think about the oppression of our people, this idea that the representative has already spoken to of how through codification of the laws, we are not even really human, really subhuman. And you have the separation of white and colored because of that distinction that is made that really has its basis in theology. You know, race, again, if I can just backtrack to our initial conversation, race is a social construct that was invented for the exploitation of Black, brown, and indigenous bodies, as well as to bring pleasure to other bodies. And I put those two together because oftentimes we only focus on chattel slavery as a means of building profits. And indeed, the chattel slavery of America very quickly built the second largest economy in the world. But we also must recognize in a report that just came out from a 23andMe study that was reported by the New York Times, that there was so much rape and sexual assault of Black female women during slavery that white men actually have contributed more to the gene pool of Black people in America than Black men. That's how abundant it was, even connected back to some of our founding fathers, you know, Thomas Jefferson and others, right? So our very bodies have been politicized. And, you know, for a city like Dallas, this is really the prevailing issue for us in Dallas. This is a 1920s era authentic Ku Klux Klan hood. I have the robe as well. And the city of Dallas was constructed, particularly at the beginnings of the 20th century, by the KKK here in the city, right? Which was the largest KKK chapter in America. Still to this day, Dallas boasts the largest single day induction of the KKK in American history. 1 out of every 3 eligible men in the city of Dallas near the top of the 20th century was members of the Ku Klux Klan. And they politically, along with places all across America and state houses all across America, ensured that white supremacy was a law of the land. As a matter of fact, as you investigate some of the older Confederate monuments, literally it etched into those monuments is statements of white supremacy as law. So it's impossible, particularly if you operate in a place of faith that ministers to Black and brown and indigenous people, to do so faithfully without also addressing the ways in which our bodies have been politicized and the harm that has come based on those realities. There is a reason that we have the prisons in the South. There is a reason why the majority of the persons in those prisons are arrested on low-level drug crimes, not any violent crime. And the reality is that white people are more engaged in illicit drug use than Black people. We've known that for years. That's a statistical data point. And yet the representation is a overrepresentation of Black and brown bodies that comes from the politicalization of our communities through redlining and other experiences, right? So if we're going to address these matters, it's impossible to do so without having a blind eye to the realities of how our bodies have been politicized and how this continues to cycle itself back over and over again over many generations, from mass incarceration to the defunding of our public spaces, our public schools. All those things have a racialized tint, and to eradicate them, you first must have an awareness of those realities.
Thank you. Khalid, your masjid, as you already described it, is very integrally, very deeply integrated into the community and into community action. How do politics and religion combine in the work that you do?
Well, let's look at this from a historical perspective first. Within the religious expression of African American,
Khalid,
goal has been abolished. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Has always been to dismantle, abolish, demolish white supremacy. It's always been the goal of the unique orientation. And you can see that unique orientation when you look back into history. When the Africans were enslaved here in America and were working in the fields, the cotton fields and tobacco fields, they sung spirituals. Those spirituals are begging God to deliver them. And that deliverance wasn't just to the next world from the sins of this world, it was deliverance from white supremacy. That was that unique orientation. It still exists today. Deliverance from white supremacy, demolish white supremacy. That unique orientation that we have as a people have produced individuals like Dr. King, John Lewis, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Imam Wafdi Muhammad, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Denmark Vesey, David Walker, has produced those people. And those people have had a profound effect, not just politically in America, profound effect religiously, socially. They question why you have to have a white Jesus. They question white supremacy in religion. They question the flourishing of white supremacy in our culture, in our schools, in our education system. They question all of that, as well in politics. So that convergence because of the unique orientation we had that had to address the issues that we have. There was a spillover politically, socially, culturally, in American society.
Thank you. You know, I want to leave some time for questions. I want to remind people that audience members, if you have questions, you can email them to dallas@ajc.org. This is an amazing conversation, and it could probably go on for 2 hours, but I don't want to keep it to just our questions. So I'm going to combine two last questions, which is, the first question is, what is the role of interfaith or coalition partners in this work? How can we who are outside the Black community be maximally effective as allies? And concurrent with that, I'd also like you to take a look at what might be holding our congregations back. What could be holding back our congregations or those we lead from responding to this call for racial justice? How can we transform ourselves, if you will, from the Adams who hear God's call and try to hide to the Abrahams who hear God's call and say, Hineni, I'm here, I'm ready. So both of those sides, what can our interfaith and coalition partners do, and what might be holding us back from doing what we must do? And we'll start with Michael.
Well, I appreciate the question, and to use the scriptural framework that you have provided for us, I will answer the question in reverse. I think the thing that's holding us back is a lack of courage. Dr. King said it best, that the true measure of a person, if you will, is not where they stand in times of comfort and convenience, but of challenge and controversy. That has always been the measure of our greater selves. And for a number of reasons, there are individuals who have lacked the courage to truly engage in the struggle for the liberation of all people. Sometimes it was a threat to their bodies, sometimes it was a threat to their pocketbooks or their status. But we've seen over and over again in history that progress has been made by those individuals who were selfless enough to make sacrifices for the advancement of the whole. If I can also bring from Dr. King this understanding that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it demands our collaborative and communal response, that issues that impact, quote unquote, the Black community do not just impact the Black community, they impact us all. That anywhere there is suffering, we are called to be a part of the alleviation of that suffering and to provide a healing and restoration. And thankfully, as we study history, particularly American history, some of the great penultimate moments of progress in our nation have been multi-faith. It's been individuals who have found one another and who have collaborated together to bring about justice. So we have to reframe even our understanding of the civil rights movement. What was a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, intergenerational movement for justice, which brings me great hope that even in this moment where unfortunately people are moved to justice because yet another prominent death has been displayed before us, we still see a reflection of the power that happens when we all come together, when all races, all backgrounds across America. Some are saying that the Black Lives Matter protests of the summer of 2020 are the largest continuous protests in American history. Well, the reason that is the case is because we have found one another in this harrowing time, and we have committed ourselves, or at least I have the hope that we have fully committed ourselves to bring about this necessary liberation. So how are we to be good allies to each other? I think that's also a very important point. And one way in which we are a good ally is we investigate our own prejudices and biases before we enter into the space. There is such a thing as white supremacy. There's also such a thing as white liberal patriarchy, right? This idea that we know better than you and we want to control the progress. And both, whether they're on the quote unquote left or right of the spectrum, are damaging to the souls of Black, brown, and indigenous people, because it says we know better than you, as opposed to centering our experience with oppression and letting those who have been most impacted lead the way. Sometimes the greatest thing you can do as a member of the minority is show up. The majority is show up. There have even been instances in this summer struggle where white bodies have placed themselves in front of Black bodies to serve as a shield. And interestingly enough, on many occasions, that was enough to keep police forces from advancing upon protesters. That's very powerful, that just the presence of a white body, in particular a white female body, is enough to halt the advancement of these attacks, which would likely not have been the case had it been Black or even Black female bodies. And so, again, this is a very encouraging time. I'm always one who, while very hopeful and very optimistic, is mindful that we still have a long way to go, that we can't hang our hat and act as though we have fully achieved, because there's so much left for us to achieve. But frankly, what we see happen in America today is more emblematic of the actual progress we've made in future generations, and therefore is a hopeful time.
Amen. Khalid, could you've already spoken about being involved in coalition work. What is the role of our coalitions? How can we best be allies, and what's holding us back?
It's a very good question. 2 points I want to make. One, the thing that we could do, all of us, including our allies, we first mitigate these issues, try to transform society. First thing you do to mitigate, you acknowledge the harm that's been done. Our faculties, Black people, Black children, white people, white children, all been degraded. You see that in the dog test. The dog test 1947 has been repeated several times. Our faculty have been degraded. There's been a lot of harm done. We have to acknowledge that first. All the complicity of white supremacy and how it affected Black families and destroyed Black families. Acknowledge that. Acknowledgement first. Secondly, all the mores, all the ideologies, the views and values that are endemic to white supremacy. We have to reject and replace those values with multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-racial values. That takes all of us, Black people, white people, brown people, of all religions. And secondly, we have to be vigilant. I say vigilant because a person can embody white supremacy and at the same time abhor racism and be offended if you call them a racist and don't consider themselves a racist. But their actions support the very thing they're against. A prime example is Amy Cooper in New York in Central Park. The call police was trying to call black bird watch in Central Park. That lady was a white liberal. She would abhor being called a racist, but she embodied some values, some views, some mores of white supremacy. So we have to be vigilant first and realize that you can embody these things and not even know you can embody the values of white supremacy and not even know it yourselves. So be vigilant in our circle, be vigilant in our community, be vigilant where we are, be vigilant in terms of our religion. Vigilant. That involves all of us.
The wonders of Zoom. Sometimes we do freeze. Carl, why don't we go to you to kind of bat clean up, if you will, on this question, and then we'll open to questions. The question of the role of coalitions and partnerships in our work and how we can be best allies, and really, to me, the strongest question: what's holding us back from doing what we should be doing?
Well, we are at a profoundly difficult time and moment in our democracy. And if the church does not have the political fortitude and courage to move beyond fear and actually practice the faith that we preach, we will be back at the same point and never move. This is a moment, I believe, that God has given us to be able to make this change and be the Christians or the God followers that we profess to be. You know, sometimes I think we are at sort of a twilight moment, because it's not night and it's not early in the day. We're just right there in the middle. And on the horizon is all of this hope and optimism, and on, you know, just where we are, if we do nothing, if we compromise, if we act in our fear and we don't have the courage to really do what's right in coming together, regardless of faith, then we will be doomed. Our next generation will repeat what we have done. And so, you know, it is really a matter of recognizing truth, recognizing our sins, and being willing to repent of those sins before we try and swiftly move to reconciliation. I'm amazed at you know, our propensity as a country to always want to celebrate and have these sort of benign historical views of what we went through. And one of those individuals that we always look up to for the great work, service that he did to not just move Black Americans forward, but white Americans as well, and Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and that was Dr. Martin Luther King. And we often, politicians and preachers alike, will cite the I Have a Dream speech. But we don't really understand the real gravity of that speech in talking about the ills and sins of this nation. There's one part that he says, and he repeats this, so you know he was trying to emphasize it. He says, there are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as a Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. That was 1963. We're still here today because America refuses to believe that it is wrong and that it is a racist nature from its foundation. And so until all of us come together, Jews, Gentiles, until we all come together as Protestants and believers, we will not see change. Because this change will cause for all of us to have to get out of our comfort zones, especially those who have been the benefactors of this prejudice system that we live under.
Thank you. Powerful words. Khalid, you got cut off by Zoom at the end. I didn't know if you wanted to, I want to be respectful if you had anything more to add.
I don't know when I got cut off.
I think you were closing out with the need for us to be self-reflective and to look into our own hearts before we can look outward.
I talked about being vigilant and that
Yeah.
a person can embody the value and views of white supremacy and at the same time have, be against that, be against racism, not consider themselves racist. But if you look at their actions support the very thing that they see they say they're against. We use her in Central Park as an example. She was a white liberal. Look at her these mores and these values. All of us have to be vision. But whites have to be vision.
All right, Khalid, I think we're having trouble again, but thank you. I think we did get the heart of what you were saying, which we do really need to know how much is within us before we can look outward and make change. Amy, I don't know how much time we have for a couple of questions. I'm sorry, you get four clergy together. You're going to get a lot of time talking, but I'll turn it to you if you have a couple of questions.
That was the risk we were willing to take. This has been really invigorating. I'm going to combine a couple questions in the interest of time. AJC has been working diligently to improve Black-Jewish relations through efforts such as assisting in the launch of the Black-Jewish Congressional Caucus. This is a renewed effort of collaboration that harks back to previous generations. Perhaps that image of Rabbi Joshua Heschel arm in arm with Martin Luther King marching together, or rather praying with their feet together. Even with this deep history between the two groups, there has been recent distancing. I was wondering if our panelists could speak to some of these friction points between the Black Jewish community and how we can move forward in partnership and allyship. And I'd also just quickly like to mention yesterday, AJC had a phenomenal program with comedian and public figure Nick Cannon regarding a similar gist to this topic that I highly recommend checking out via any of our Facebook pages or the AJC website. But again, wondering if our panelists could speak a little bit more on how the Black-Jewish relations can move forward and be work together to be actors of change.
Somebody want to go? Raise your hand. Carl.
Well, let me speak to that. I believe that God has embedded in our faith, whether you're a Jewish person or Muslim or Christian, our faith is embedded with bridges to the other person that may not be like us in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, in terms of race. I think we all need to take advantage of those bridges that already exist. Example, in our religion, our Quran, God said he created us male and female. Then he said he created us different ethnicities, different races, different tribes, in order that we may know each other. So we can know each other. So we can dispel ignorance. Ignorance, a lot of times, is the basis for these frictions that we have, the friction that we have, the basis for. So we have to use the bridges that exist today. And I tell people all the time that when you work with other people, that doesn't mean that you have to be just like them. Unity is not synonymous with uniformity. You can be different and work with people. Unity means differences come together, different elements, differences come together. When you have uniformity of sameness, sameness is not unity. So you can come together, although you are different, although you don't see eye to eye on every single thing, but find ways to engage each other. I think that's a responsible thing to do as believers.
Thank you. Carl, you had some words?
Well, along the same line as Imam Shaheed, when he quoted or cited the Quran, I would say from the Word of God too, Acts 17, when Paul is going through Athens and he notices that they have a monument for every god, and then he says, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is he worshipped with man's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing that he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on all the face of the earth. I want to just start with just 2 points here, and I'll be finished. But that is that he starts with these monuments. These monuments that were honoring gods. If you ask me what I think HJC could do to help us, would be to recognize that these monuments establish high honor for these individuals that were oppressors of humanity. You know this, and those who know American history and world history know that America was a driving force behind the creation of NATO. And after the war ended, and we helped to liberate Germany, and after that ended, one of the requirements was that they had to destroy and bring down all of the monuments of any symbols of swastika, and any monuments in Germany had to come down. And that is because we were victorious. Never should the country who loses, the rebels who lost, be able to continue to hold their monuments up in esteem. And again, just like the prisons, it's not by accident that there are more of these Confederate monuments in the South below the Dixie line than in anywhere in North America. So that's how I think HJC and the Jewish community and African American community could work together, because you know from history that the continuation of those monuments would have meant the perpetuation and the glorifying of that period. And there is no other war in our history that we play out, that men, grown men, gather together and relive, except the Civil War. And that is because it did not turn out the way that they wanted it to turn out.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to give some closing thoughts?
Sure. My colleague, Andrew Paley, Rabbi Andrew Paley, Temple Shalom, is want to say that the most repeated commandment in the Torah is a commandment to remember. And that has been our greatest failure, is that we fail to remember our history. Most folk don't understand the Heschel-King connection. They don't understand how deep it goes, the commitment to mutual liberation. And so even to make reference to that is to provide an educational moment for people to understand that we have a history that has gone on for generations, that it's the sacred texts of the Jewish people that provide inspiration for Black slaves seeking their own liberation, the stories of Exodus from Egypt that provide the initial strength and stories to our people as we were likewise seeking liberation. So that's one aspect that we must address, the fact that we don't remember. There is a vacuum of history. And there's this idea in Africa of the Sankofa, that you can't know what's ahead of you until you know what's behind you, that you can't accurately move forward to the future until you understand your past. And I think that's greatly lacking within our communities today. But let me also acknowledge the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that there are bigoted Jewish people and there are bigoted Black people. And until we acknowledge our own bigotry, how can we ever move forward? That's always been the case. And, you know, the idea that charity starts at home, how do we mine out the ways in which we perpetuate these prejudice ideas against each other? I think that goes back and harkens back to what my colleagues have said today, that until we do some internal work, until we investigate ourselves, we won't have a strong foundation with which to move forward. And when we allow this bigotry to fester in our churches, in our homes, in our synagogues, it then breaks out in very unfortunate ways. And so that's where I will leave my hat today in saying that all of us are called to be anti-racist. And to be anti-racist in the full capacity of that word is not simply, although it's very important, to tear down systems of white supremacy, but also to address it on an interpersonal level. That means each and every one of us has a responsibility. If we are in space and place where we hear these ideals being shared, that we are the first line of defense, that we are called to call it out and to speak the truth of who we are, all created in the image of God. And so I think that's one way that AJC can continue to advance. I think that's one way all of us can continue to advance progress, is become anti-racist to our very bones, that we will address these systemic structures politically, economically, educationally, but we will also be courageous enough to do it interpersonally and to call out those persons around us who may be pushing forward these wayward and destructive ideals.
So I want to thank all of you for your words. And Michael, if I might add a little bit to what you just said, one of the things that has struck me over the years as I've engaged in Black Jewish work together in our communities working together is we do share a deep connection to the Exodus story. And one of the lessons of the Exodus story is that if we are to get to the promised land, the only way we get there is when we get there marching together as one. We can't go there as separate or disparate people. We have to go there as one, holding hands, walking into the promised land. And secondly, we cannot enter the promised land unless we do so with courage. The first time we tried to enter the promised land, we didn't have courage and God turned us back and made us wander. The next time we entered with courage and with faith. And so as we engage in this work of our communities working together to combat pervasive racism that afflicts our country, let us do so walking together as one, hand in hand with courage and faith. And I hope this conversation has helped us get a little closer to that. I thank you for all I've learned from you. I thank all those who've joined us to learn from you today. And to everything that's been said, let us say amen.
And Rabbi David, to that point, finally, when you cross over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma and you make it to the other side, there is a stone which is etched upon it, the words of Scripture, that there will come a time when your children will ask, what do these stones mean? And you must testify to them how we made it over, which symbolizes that story and its significance in our struggle for progress. For as John Lewis said, we have one more bridge to cross, And indeed, there's still work for us to do to make this world a place of diversity, equality, and equity.
And may we get to that place.
Amen.
Amy.
This has been wonderful, and I'd like to say just a great note to end on. All four of you gentlemen, Rabbi David Levy, Imam Khalid, Shaheed, the Honorable Pastor Carl Sherman, and of course, Reverend Dr. Michael Waters. This has been a very interesting and enlightening conversation. I appreciate your time. To the audience members, thank you for joining us today. Two quick notes. Dr. Waters mentioned the Poor People's Campaign in one of his comments. There is a meeting scheduled on August 19th. So please contact us at dallas@ajc.org, and we can give you some more specifics on that. Just wanted to wrap that up. Additionally, we have our next session, part 3 of 5, this coming Tuesday morning, 8 a.m., same time, same day of the week. And the focus will be on equity. We will be featuring a conversation with City Councilman Casey Thomas, who represents District 3, Michelle Perdhammer Coleman, who is the District DISD Officer of Racial Equity, and Angie Lee, Director of Office of Racial Equality for RISD. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Lindsay Wilson, the Interim Equity Officer for the City of Dallas. It should be another interesting conversation, and would welcome you to join us for that third part as well. Again, just a note of gratitude for you all being here with us, sharing your stories, and I think that it's safe to say that we all learned something and motivated us to move forward together. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you for our next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.